Hey there, friends, and welcome to episode 239 of Just the Zoo of Us. I know we don't normally do back-to-back guest episodes, but it was very important for this episode to come out today because this episode is all about hyping up chameleons in preparation for the first ever International Chameleon Day, which is, as of this episode's release, tomorrow, Thursday, May 9th. So I got to talk with a biologist who has spent his career studying chameleons and working to promote their conservation, and he gives us all the juicy details about the weird stuff, like their ballistic tongue projection, color changing and how cartoons get it wrong, eyes that move independently of each other, prehensile tails that act like a fifth leg, and so much more. It is a wild ride, and you're going to love it. Just the Zoo of Us presents Chameleons with Dr. Chris Anderson. Hello, everybody. This is Ellen Weatherford, and welcome to Just the Zoo of Us, your favorite animal review podcast. I'm so excited this week to bring a brand new friend to talk about some incredible animals that we've touched on the podcast, but it was a really, really long time ago. So I'm excited to get some more in-depth insight into these amazing animals this week. This is our brand new friend, Dr. Chris Anderson. Say hi, Chris.
Hi, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here to talk about these awesome animals. Chris, if you don't mind, what are your pronouns?
He and him.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to talk about chameleons, first of all, because we have an exciting publicity festival for chameleons. Can you tell me a little bit about International Chameleon Day?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of special days that have been designated for various topics. And, there's various days for different types of animals. One of those was World Lemur Day, which has been going on for a few years now. And it's been really successful for promoting education and conservation outreach for lemurs. And an NGO that was involved in the World Lemur Day and works quite a bit in Madagascar, where a lot of chameleons are, kind of came up with this idea that we needed an International Chameleon Day. And they spearheaded this idea and helped coordinate May 9th of this year being the inaugural International Chameleon Day to help promote awareness and education and outreach about chameleons.
And when this episode is going up, that is this Thursday, May 9th. So get your cosplay ready, get all of your chameleon gear, get your chameleon merch, get ready to represent.
That's right. Eye goggles for the chameleons and so on.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine if there was some kind of steampunk turret shaped eye goggles? Those would be a nightmare to wear because of the tiny little points.
I've seen little goggle glasses that you can put on your head, and they make it so that you have to look out these little tiny holes in different directions, and it just seems miserable to me.
Yeah, no thanks. Won't be me.
No, can't do it.
So we're all very excited about International Chameleon Day. Chris, I would love to get to know you a little bit and how you got involved with International Chameleon Day. Could you let our friends listening know what your path has been like alongside these amazing reptiles?
Yeah, so I'm actually currently an associate professor at the University of South Dakota in the Department of Biology. And for the research that goes on in my lab, I'm really interested in how animals move, how animals perform in their environment, and what makes animals do the things that they do. And one of the main things that I study is actually chameleons. I've had a long interest in chameleons since I was a kid, and they're kind of the primary focus of my lab. And so we study things like how chameleons shoot their tongues out to feed, how they are moving around in arboreal habitats, so like walking around on branches in the trees and things of that nature. And one of the additional hats that I wear is I also work with the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, in what's called the Chameleon Specialist Group. And so I'm the chair of the Chameleon Chameleon Specialist Group, which is a group of experts from around the world on chameleons. And we are kind of charged with spearheading and coordinating the conservation efforts related to chameleons worldwide, and also as a central location for governments or management agencies or NGOs or even broadcasters, whoever can reach out to us for information, data, scientific data on chameleons that help to inform what they are, interested in, whatever their question is. And one of the things that the IUCN does is that they put together these assessments for the conservation status of different species in a repository that's called the IUCN Red List.
It's gotten quite a few mentions. We basically, every episode that we do, there's a spot in our notes template where we go to the IUCN Red List and check their conservation status for every single one.
It's a critically important metric for understanding the threat level for a species or a group of animals in the wild. And so one of the things the Chameleon Specialist Group does is we help to coordinate those assessments for chameleons generally. And so that's one of the major pushes that we do as a group. Now, so background-wise is how I got into chameleons. I actually started with an interest in chameleons as a hobby. I was interested in, when I was in middle school, in getting a chameleon as a pet. And my parents were aware of the fact that chameleons have kind of a reputation for being delicate and challenging animals to keep in captivity.
Not a beginner pet.
No, not a beginner pet. And I'd had other reptiles and so forth. So I wasn't, a novice completely going into it. But they recognized that this was a commitment that they wanted to make sure that I was ready for. And so they challenged me to basically read up on chameleons, get all the information I could for 6 months. And if after 6 months of reading up on them, I was still interested, then we could talk, basically.
I think I know how that went.
It turned into an obsession. And here we are, almost 25 or so years later. And, it's become an all-encompassing type of obsession. And it really kind of created a fascination with the biology of these animals that kind of took root as to structuring some of my general interests in biology as a whole and, my profession now. I did end up getting, chameleon as a pet, and that turned into a couple chameleons and more than that. And I actually still work with chameleons as a hobby, as I have pet chameleons that I keep and breed. And then I have my professional side where I also work with them in the lab doing research to advance our knowledge of chameleon biology.
Okay, so this is where I have to point out something that listeners only hearing this cannot see, because I can see the webcam and they can't, is that there's an actual chameleon behind you right now.
Yeah, exactly.
They're here to actually sort of set the record straight. They're here to make sure that they're being represented accurately.
That's right. So I'm in my office right now at the university, and I actually am just back from field work in South Africa where we were working with chameleons, and we brought some back for us to work with in the lab. And I have an enclosure in my office that's kind of an extra enclosure. And one of the animals that we brought back is currently in that enclosure, keeping an eye on me and making sure that I'm representing them appropriately for this podcast for International Chameleon Day.
That is the project supervisor over there.
Right. That's the boss.
And they've always got one eye on you.
That's exactly right. They're keeping an eye out on what I'm doing and, the rest of their surroundings, but they're not taking their eye off me. That's for sure.
Like the literal eye in the back of the head sort of thing. Like, I'm always watching.
Yep, exactly. There's some actually great Malagasy proverbs. So some of the largest diversity of chameleon species is from Madagascar. And they have a lot of cultural significance for the Malagasy people. And one of their proverbs essentially talks about how you need to be wise like a chameleon. You keep one eye on the past and one eye towards the future. And so it kind of highlights that fact that they're looking in two directions and you need to remember where you're coming from, but keep an eye on where you're going. But the amazing thing is with how awesome of a proverb that is, there's actually also a lot of superstitions about chameleons as well. And so a lot of locals think chameleons are dangerous. They think they're venomous. They think they bring bad luck, or, there's superstitions about chameleons. And so it's this interesting dichotomy where they have that great proverb, about the wisdom of the chameleon with its vision, but also kind of those superstitions about, them maybe being dangerous as well, which of course they're not. They're completely harmless, but those superstitions can be rooted deep in cultures.
And not the only way that chameleons are misunderstood. I'll kind of bring that back up later when we're getting into the sort of details of chameleons, but not the only way that people have kind of pegged them wrong.
For sure.
But for people who are listening and maybe a little bit unfamiliar with chameleons, maybe only ever seen them on a screen, You mentioned that you were doing fieldwork in South Africa and that a lot of chameleon biodiversity is in Madagascar. So where in the world do you typically find chameleons? Are they like restricted to Africa, or like where do you find them?
Yeah, so chameleons are considered old world. And so they live in continental Africa, some surrounding islands and so forth. They get into the Mediterranean region with some animals in southern Europe. So like Spain and Italy and Greece and Turkey and so forth. There's some species that live in the Middle East. And then there's a disjunct population that lives in the Indian subcontinent, with Pakistan, India, and Sri Lanka having a single species among them. So these are animals that most of the diversity of chameleons is found within continental Africa and Madagascar. Chameleons are one of those animals that have fascinated naturalists for centuries. Some of the first records and notes about chameleons were from Aristotle in like 200 BC or something like that. And so these have fundamentally been something that's fascinated people for centuries. And when you mention a chameleon to most people, they have a picture in their mind of what a chameleon is. They kind of recognize some of those characteristics, the color change ability, the independently moving eyes, and the prehensile tail that curls under them. They have this picture of chameleons in their mind. But one of the things that I think is super cool about chameleons, and I think is underappreciated, is just how diverse chameleons are in their own right. Because for all of that characteristic features that we associate with chameleons, there's an incredible amount of diversity that we don't recognize typically as public. And so there's actually 228 species of chameleons that are currently described and recognized to science, and that increases every year. Every year there's new species that are described. In Madagascar, there are 98 different species, which is about 48% of all chameleon diversity is from Madagascar alone, which is a very small area to find them. And we see an incredible amount of variation among those species. And so we have some species that are getting up to 30 centimeters in total length, so body and tail. That's a fairly large lizard.
That's like what, forearm length maybe?
Exactly, yeah. Think about it without the tail, it's probably, forearm length. And that's pretty impressive. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have some species that their body length is about 1.5 centimeters long. And those animals, as full-grown adults, will sit on the end of a matchstick. And those animals are able to change color. They're able to shoot their tongues out. They're able to do all of these things that these large chameleons do at a fraction of the size. We also see that there's, many chameleon species lay eggs like many reptiles, but there's also species, multiple lineages actually within chameleons that give live birth. There are some chameleon species that have been known to live in captivity over 20 years. And then the shortest lived tetrapod species, so that's the shortest lived mammal, bird, reptile, or amphibian, is actually a chameleon, and that species only lives 3 to 4 months in certain populations.
That's like living on bug time.
Yeah. And so after 3 to 4 months, the entire population dies off, and the entire species at that location is only found underground, incubating in eggs. And that's an incredible difference in the life history strategy that we're talking about between that species and these species that are living over 20 years. And so there's many of these features about chameleons that are incredibly diverse and intriguing that we don't really, as a society, recognize, even though chameleons have this quintessential place in our folklore and understanding of like what is a chameleon. And that's one of the things that's always fascinated me, is just that diversity within the animals.
I know I said like living on bug time, like as a joke, but when you said that like the population actually has these cycles of like die off and then living underground, like that's like cicada behavior. Like this is, it's so interesting to see a reptile slotting into the like insect slot where you don't usually see reptiles go.
Yeah, exactly. 8 months or so out of the year, you only find that species, at least in certain populations, in the more arid environments that they live, underground. I mean, that's just super bizarre for a reptile.
Sometimes I would like to only be found underground for just, you give me a few months.
There's certain seasons for sure out here in South Dakota that's
like, I think I'm actually gonna chill the next few months underground.
Yep, exactly. See you when the sun comes up.
If this is anyone's first time listening to this particular podcast, we review animals by rating them out of 10. And the first category we review animals on is effectiveness. This is just physical adaptations, way the animal's body has changed, tools they have kind of built in to let them do the things they're trying to do, whether this is catch their prey or not become prey themselves. What do you give chameleons out of 10 for effectiveness?
Well, I'm going to be biased. I mean, chameleons are my thing, and I've always been, partial to chameleons. So I'm going to rate them high on that. But I think they're deserving.
What can't they do?
Yeah, exactly. They have ballistic tongue projection where they're shooting their tongues 2.5 body lengths out of their mouth. They're changing color. They're, have these pincer-like feet to move around on trees and on branches. They do have some shortcomings. They're kind of slow, and so maybe they're not perfect. But I'm going to give them a solid 8 out of 10 for effectiveness.
I want to come back first to the ballistic tongue, because this is something that I think a lot of people maybe are sort of familiar with about chameleons, but I think also overgeneralize it to think that either all lizards or I've seen people think that all frogs can do this, or the chameleons is so good and so cool that people are surely they're not the only ones that can do this, right?
Yeah. So the chameleons, the way that they feed is they are able to launch their tongue out of their mouth at extremely high performance. And so this is an incredibly dynamic behavior that happens extremely quickly. And we actually use high-speed video to slow it down and be able to look at what's going on and characterize the performance and the length of the tongue and so forth. And they really do stand out among animals that are able to launch their tongues out of their mouth. So there are some frog species that do a type of ballistic tongue projection. It's called inertial elongation, actually, is the technical term for it, where they flip their tongue out and kind of extend their tongue to capture prey. There's also some salamanders that are able to shoot their tongues out of their mouth ballistically and capture prey.
Are you at all familiar with Pokemon?
I'm not actually, but I know that
okay.
There are some characters that that have some of these features.
The Pokemon Lickitung is based on the salamanders that can shoot their tongues out.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like that's bio-inspired design right there, right?
It's so good.
So yeah, there are salamanders that can project their tongues out of their mouth, and they do, an okay job of it. They can project their tongues about one body length, which is impressive. That's a good distance. Chameleons, though, are extraordinary in this regard. Small species of chameleons are able to project their tongues 2.5 times their body length, which is ridiculous. I mean, you're talking about an incredible amount of length change that muscle that retracts the tongue has to undergo. And they have a lot of specializations physiologically and anatomically to allow for that to happen. And so they're super specialized in their feeding performance. And that tongue launch in those small species has the fastest accelerations that have ever been recorded among any amniote. And so that's any bird, reptile, or mammal. They have the highest accelerations for any amniote movement that's ever been reported.
That makes me think of what you said a minute ago about them being kind of slow moving. It feels like this is making up for that.
It's a little bit of a dichotomy there again, right? They're slow moving as far as their walking, and their locomotion is slow. And actually their muscles physiologically are slower than other reptile muscles. And so they actually physiologically cannot run as fast or contract their muscles as quickly as most other reptiles would be able to. But their tongue projection mechanism is extraordinary, and they achieve these incredible performance feats in order to overcome that and to capture prey, some distance away and surprise them.
I guess this would maybe help them catch prey that's at a distance where they couldn't close it quickly enough, but without having to move their body and give their cover away. Because, they're moving so slowly that you would easily miss them. But then all of a sudden you just blink and suddenly, you've been got. Yeah.
So it's an effective ambush strategy. Actually, one of the things that I study with the chameleon feeding is it actually has some pretty cool thermoregulatory implications as well.
Ooh.
If you think about reptiles, reptiles need to obtain heat from their environment. So their core body temperature is related to environmental temperature, behavioral basking, and things like that. But first thing in the day on a cold morning, those reptiles are slow. Their body temperature hasn't gotten to a point where they are able to contract their muscles as quickly, and that limits them in their ability to chase down prey and capture food. Chameleons, though, utilize what's called an elastic recoil mechanism in their tongue, where they basically are able to slowly stretch elastic tissues with their muscles, and then they release those elastic tissues, and that recoil of those elastic tissues is what launches the tongue, and it does so extremely rapidly, even if it's cold. And so while other lizards are physiologically unable to capture prey items because their muscles are not warm enough to power sprinting that would be necessary to capture food, chameleons can catch their food first thing in the morning and then just warm up later to digest it.
It's like pulling back a rubber band when you're about to flick your sibling with it.
Exactly right, or bow and arrow. You slowly pull that rubber band back or that bow, and then you release it, and the performance is just like the snap of a finger. It's super fast.
That is a really cool way of taking a loophole around, like, I don't have the burst of energy, but I can build up tension and let the tension do the work for me.
That's exactly right. Because they can do it slowly and then take advantage of those mechanical properties for that elastic tissue. It's super cool.
So going slow isn't always a problem. Like, no. You can make it work.
You can get around it. And chameleons are a great example of that. Their muscles are slow, but they found a way to get around it.
Something that a lot of people probably already know about chameleons, or maybe already think they know about chameleons, maybe don't totally understand it correctly, because this is a big thing that gets misrepresented a lot, is their color changing. You know, you see this in a cartoon where a chameleon will like step on a picnic blanket and turn, polka dotted and stuff like that. You see this in cartoons all the time. So I would love to set the record straight on chameleon color changing.
Yep. Yeah. So that old wives' tale, I guess we could call it, is that if you put a chameleon on a plaid shirt, it will, match that background. But that's not actually what chameleons are doing. Chameleon color change is a lot more complex than that. They use it for a lot of different types of behaviors. One of those is thermoregulation. And so, if they are cold, they can darken themselves up. That will allow them to absorb more heat. If they're warm, they can make themselves lighter, and that will help reflect some of that light energy. And so thermoregulation is a piece of that color change puzzle. But the majority of what they actually use it for is signaling and communication among other chameleons. And so chameleon color change is extremely diverse and dynamic. It helps with species recognition. It helps communicate the reproductive status of a female if a male is coming towards her. It helps to communicate whether a male is dominant or passive or submissive to help mitigate some of the threats for male-male combat. It helps to communicate things like health and stress and so forth. And so they're really using it as a communication mechanism. Now, that isn't to say that they don't also use some of it for crypsis and for blending into their environment. Now, over evolutionary timescales, the color that chameleons are is beneficial to them in their environment. It helps them to blend into their environment. The greens, the yellows, the speckling, and so forth, that helps them blend into their environment. And there is evidence that if a chameleon is approached by, say, a snake that is, going to approach from below versus a bird that approaches from above, they will change color in a different way in order to maximize the background matching that they are performing. So a snake coming from below, the chameleon is going to change color in a way that helps it to background match against the sky. Wow. Whereas a bird coming from above, it's going to color change in a different way that helps it background match against the substrate, the ground below it. And so it's not that they aren't doing background matching. They do some background matching, but it's not the highly dynamic and, super diverse way that we tend to think of it, like, putting on a plaid shirt or putting on a shirt or something like that. They don't do it like that. They aren't matching it in that way. They are using it more for communication and for some of those naturally selected color change patterns based on interactions with predators and so forth.
That's really interesting, the like changing color to match like the context of the predator, because that reminds me a lot of sea creatures with their counter shading. And they'll be like dark on the top and light on the bottom.
Exactly. And one of the things that we know too is that different animals are able to see different colors and different combinations of colors because of the sensitivity of their eyes. And that is really important when you're trying to avoid detection. To change, if you have the capacity to change color, your color change needs to be relevant to the predator that is trying to find you, to trying to perceive you. Because if it's something that doesn't have very good color differentiation, you might not need to be as good at color changing or color matching. But if it's something like a bird or a raptor or something like that has very good color vision and has more sensitivity than like we do as humans, you need to be pretty good and you need to change color in a different way for that predator than you would for maybe some snake species. And so it's a super cool system to think about in that way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about things like the panther chameleons, right? That have like these really, really rainbowy, sort of funky psychedelic colors. And I'm thinking like that can't be helping.
You would think so, but you know what? I've found some of those animals, in the wild and had those incredible color displays. And if you stand back and you squint, it's actually remarkable how well they actually blend in, from a distance because of that dappled light, because the leaves of different colors, because of, interspersed flowers, because of the depth and texture of the environment around them. Those different colors really model nicely and help them blend in quite surprisingly well.
Chameleons being super good at not being seen makes me want to talk about how good they are at seeing others, because these eyes are bananas. They're so bonkers. What is happening? Why are their eyes like that?
They have incredible vision. So one of the things when you look at a chameleon is you can see that their eyes are quite large for the size of their head. And the other thing that they have that's quite large for the size of their head is their tongue. And so those two sensory structures, their tongue and their eyes, have really taken over. They don't have good sense of smell. They don't really have actually a good sense of taste. That tongue is really taken over for being able to be launched out of the mouth. And then the eyes, they're highly visual animals. They're able to independently rotate their eyes so that they can look in two different directions at once, or they can rotate them and focus in front of them, and they can look stereoscopically forward to hone in on a prey item. Now, that's really helpful because if you have two eyes, you can judge distance. And that's how we judge distance. We have our two eyes that help give us information about depth. Chameleons actually don't need two eyes to sense depth. They have specialized abilities with an individual eye that they can change the shape of their retina and their cornea in order to judge distances accurately with a single eye.
Oh, wow.
And so this creates an incredible capability for them to be very effective in determining how long they need to launch their tongue out to capture a prey item. They can also see incredible distances. I've been in the field handling a chameleon, and all of a sudden it will start rotating behind my arm or my finger, and I realize that it's picked up a bird of prey like way out in the distance, and they have very good eyesight. And that, of course, helps with the color change that they use to communicate with each other.
And when those two eyes both lock onto something, if you get a view of a chameleon from the front, boy, it's silly.
It's a great view. It's really comical. It's cool.
But I like it when they both kind of like target acquired, like snap into focus in one direction. It's silly looking, but it is really cool.
Yeah, it is totally business at that point. They're getting ready to catch that prey item.
But then you get them like casually, just kind of like, I wish I could uncouple my eyes. You know what I mean? Like, I wish I could just like let them loose.
Yep.
Let them wander.
They're great at kind of rolling around a branch and then just kind of extending one eye around that branch to keep an eye on you, but hiding otherwise.
Last thing I wanted to ask about in our sort of like key highlights of the chameleon body is the tail, because the tail is like, if you've ever had the chance to handle a chameleon, it is really cool. They use it in a really interesting way where they can kind of twist it around things. This is another thing that I think gets misrepresented in cartoons, because you'll always see them kind of like hanging down off of a branch, holding on to it with their tail.
Yeah, so chameleons have a prehensile tail, or many species of chameleons have a prehensile tail. The length of the tail across different chameleon species is actually very variable. There are some chameleon species that are called stump-tailed chameleons that have extremely short tails that basically are not functionally doing much for them. On the other hand, you have species that have tails that are longer than the rest of their body. And those tails can curl up into a tight spiral underneath their body at rest, but then they can use that to wrap around and coil around branches. And that's really good because it adds some stability to moving around in that arboreal environment up in the trees. It allows them to kind of treat that tail like a fifth limb where they can kind of anchor themselves. It's really helpful for things like gap bridging. So if they come up to a gap in the branches that they want to reach across, they can use that tail to anchor themselves and then reach across and grab onto things that are further away than they would be able to do and still balance if they didn't have that anchoring point. And, theoretically, they can lower themselves down and like hang by their tail, at least many of these species, when they're doing some of those behaviors. They are capable of doing that. Their tail really rotates primarily. It curls underneath their body. Oftentimes in folk artwork, you see that they are represented with the tail kind of curling up and above, and they can't do that. They can't go both ways. It really just curls underneath. And like I said, it's extremely variable. We kind of think about classic chameleons as having that long prehensile tail, but there are species that don't have very much of a tail. And the length of the tail is related to how arboreal those species are. And so most chameleons we think of as being highly arboreal, living in trees. But there are actually chameleons that are much more terrestrial than that. There are species that predominantly live on the ground. So there's a species that lives in Namibia in desert sand dunes where it basically is running around on the sand for the majority of the day. And it doesn't have...
Not a lot of trees.
Yeah, it doesn't have a lot of trees to climb up on. And, there are species that are living down in the leaf litter and so forth. So there's actually an incredible amount of variation in how arboreal they are. And it turns out that more arboreal species tend to have more vertebra in their tails, so longer tails, more mobile tails, than species that are less arboreal, more terrestrial.
I keep thinking about the chameleon from Tangled. I don't think it's ever explained why she has a chameleon.
I don't remember that it was, no.
He's just also there, which I think the backstory of it is just that like someone working in the production of the movie had a pet chameleon and they just wanted to like put him in the movie.
And they're neat. I mean, yeah, like, you have all those behaviors that you get to pull out at some point during the movie, right?
Even if they do the whole like, matching against a very flamboyant pattern. And I'm like,
yeah, it's propagating maybe some misconceptions, but it's playful and colorful. And it has some level of truth in the sense that they do change color and they do some background matching. It just may not be the capability of that background matching may not be as good as it's represented.
They want octopus. Like, they want octopus stuff.
Yeah, octopus.
They've just slotted it onto a chameleon.
Exactly.
Hey, y'all. We are going to take a quick break to hear from a couple of our friends on the Maximum Fun Network. When we get back, we are going to talk ingenuity and aesthetics for chameleons. So stay with us.
Sound Heap with John Luke Roberts is a real podcast made up of fake podcasts, like... If you had a cupboard in your lower back, what would you keep in it?
So I'm going to say mugs.
A little yogurt and a spoon.
A small handkerchief that was given to me by my grandmother on her deathbed.
Maybe some spare honey.
I'd keep batteries in it. I'd pretend to be a toy.
If I had a cupboard in my lower back, I'd probably fill it with spines.
If you had a cupboard in your lower back, what would you keep in it? Doesn't exist. We made it up for Sound Heap with John Luke Roberts, an award-winning comedy podcast from Maximum Fun, made up of hundreds of stupid podcasts. Listen and subscribe to Sound Heap with John Luke Roberts now.
Oh my gosh, hi, it's me, Dave Holmes, host of the pop culture game show Troubled Waters. On Troubled Waters, we play a whole host of games, like one where I describe a show using a limerick, and our guests have to figure out what it is. Let's do one right now. What show am I talking about? This podcast has game after game, and brilliant guests who come play them. The host is named Dave. It could be your fave, so try it. Life won't be the same.
Big Business starring Bette Midler and Lily Tomlin.
Close, but no.
Oh, is it Troubled Waters, the pop culture quiz show with all your favourite comedians?
Yes, Troubled Waters is the answer
to this question and all of my life's problems.
Now, legally, we actually can't guarantee that, but you can find it on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get your podcasts.
The next category that we rate animals on is ingenuity, which are behaviors, things this animal is actually doing with their body. What do you give chameleons out of 10 for ingenuity?
Again, I'm biased, but I'm going to give them a 9 out of this because, the specializations that chameleons have are pretty impressive. They have an impressive variety of specializations that allow them to live in their environment and do the things that they do. They have those pincer-like feet. They have prehensile tails. They have ballistic tongue projection. They have independently rotating eyes. They have color changing and crypsis capabilities. And you just can go on and on with chameleons. And so I think, I would rate those pretty high. They're not the only animals in the world that have each of those things. Like you said, octopus and squid can change color maybe a little bit better. Salamanders can project their tongues too, although chameleons are better at it and so forth. So they're not perfectly unique, but they've done a pretty good job of coming together with some cool, diverse specializations. So I rate them pretty high.
And having so much sort of physiologically built in, I feel like, to me, implies a high level of processing because that's a lot of sensory input. That's a lot of things to manage, right? You have to manage, your color changing and your tail and your wonky eyes going in multiple directions.
2 different images, yeah.
If you're playing a video game, the more options you have, the more challenging it can be to play because there's just too much to worry about.
Yeah, you would think so. How their brain works and how it's able to, keep separate those 2 images that are being fed into it for that sensory information. It's foreign to us. We simply don't understand how they do it entirely. And the idea of taking that much sensory information and all of these other things that they're doing, we have no real idea how they manage to do it, but they figure it out.
I also think that because their tongue is a ranged attack, right? This is something they have to, figure out getting from point A to point B in a very short amount of time, but it's a distance that they have to cross. And anytime I think about anything firing any sort of projectile, that is impressive to me because it requires aim.
Yep.
And aiming at a moving target, especially a target moving as quickly as an insect or something, that's immediately impressive.
It is. And their ability to judge distance accurately, even, right, left, up, down, get the aim right is really impressive. There was actually some super cool studies back in the 60s that were published where they put little glasses on chameleons. They hung them on the horns.
Little glasses on chameleons.
Who artificially made them nearsighted or farsighted so that the cricket or their food item was either further away or closer than they thought it was. And then when they would shoot the tongues out, it would either overshoot or it would undershoot. But then within a feeding or two, those animals were able to adjust and fix their distance to get it right. And they even played with some optics to make it so that they, were shooting out to the right or to the left, and they corrected for that. And that just goes a long way to show just how capable they are with their eyes and with their tongue projection and so forth.
And learning too, being okay, I tried this, it didn't work, and I know why it didn't work. Being able to see what went wrong and how you can fix it. That's a lot going on behind those eyes.
Exactly. So they're pretty complex, even though they may not be doing some of the things that we would classically associate with intelligence. They've got some capabilities, that's for sure.
How do you build glasses for a chameleon? It's one of those things that's you've seen the thing where it's if a giraffe wore a tie, would it wear it like this or like this? Yeah. But it's for a chameleon, do you put the glasses in the front or you'd have to have a visor that goes around the whole
So there's certain species of chameleons that have those horns that project out from their nose and above their eyes. The Jackson's chameleon is one of those. It looks a little bit like a triceratops. And they used these Jackson's chameleons in that study, and they basically just suspended them from the horns so that those lenses were in front of their eyes where they would be looking forward towards the prey.
Hold on. I gotta see if I can find a picture of this.
The author is Harkness, and it was in Nature in 1960 something. I'll send you the paper, after we're done.
That is the funniest thing I've ever heard in my life. The idea of them putting the little glasses on him.
Yeah, super cool. Super cool.
Okay, so here's why in the past I have maybe underestimated the ingenuity of chameleons, and it is because something from my own experience, something I've seen a lot of people do too. Because sometimes when you're holding one or you're handling one, if there's running water,
yep.
they'll try to climb it. Like, what's the thought process here?
Yeah, it's an optical illusion. They see that running water, that column of water, as a branch or as something that's that they can grab onto. And then when they try and do that, of course, they break the surface tension. It's not hard, and they're not used to that. That's not something that they encounter really up in the trees. They're not hanging down at waterfalls or something like that where they encounter a lot of that.
It's an interesting sort of like they would never encounter this phenomenon ever if it weren't for humans. So they're like, I don't know what this is. I don't.
Yeah, not really. And so it's just one of those things that you kind of trick their brain.
It's so like you feel the frustration of the little Spock hands just like slipping right through the water, and they don't quite get it, so they keep trying. The poor little
exactly
things.
Right. It doesn't quite seem to register. It's like, well, that was weird, but there it is again. So
surely if I try again.
Exactly. So in all ways, maybe they're not as sharp as we might think other animals are, but in other ways, they're pretty good.
In your time either keeping chameleons, personally, or in your time working with them, can you think of a time when one has ever like done something that really sort of surprised you?
Yeah. So one of my first chameleons that I had as a pet was a veiled chameleon. And veiled chameleons have a little bit of a reputation for being somewhat defensive. They will stand their ground and they will try to intimidate you. And they're large enough that they can be somewhat imposing, and then they hiss and puff up, and they can bite, and it can break the skin. I mean, it's not dangerous or anything like that, but you take them seriously when they're putting on that show. And I had a male that was somewhat aggressive, and he was challenging to hold. And I was good about bringing him out onto my hands and so forth. And I knew how to move to avoid getting bit or, and recognize that he's mostly just bluffing and so forth. But I remember handling him one time, and he started coming up my arm towards my face. And I put a hand in between him on my arm.
He's ready to throw down. He's like, it's on sight.
Yeah, he was super defensive, and he wanted to make sure that I knew that he wasn't impressed. And I put my hand out to block him so he just didn't get towards my face. And I watched him look at me and then trace back down my neck and onto my arm, and realized that he was standing on me, and turn to the side and then bite through my sleeve of my polo shirt. And I remember just watching that and realizing he just figured me out.
He had to figure out that your face is the same animal as your arm.
Yeah, all of a sudden it clicked for him, and he was just like, oh, I can get to you this way.
He just took a moment of just like computing, like
exactly
the math flying around his face. He's like, wait, hold on a second.
Exactly. And so that was one of those instances where I realized that they're not as dumb as they might seem. So, they have some processing going on there. They have some capability. And it was just kind of a funny experience that surprised me at the time.
It is extremely funny that he used his like cognitive powers, the absolute 110% of his brain, and he used it to bully you.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I'm sure that I'm anthropomorphizing him in plenty of ways, but just watching it and just watching the thought process, it was pretty clear to me that he had just figured it out how he was going to get back at me, and I was impressed.
And And probably also knew that there was no way he was going to take you down. Like, there was no way he was actually going to defeat you. But he's like, but I can cause you some minor pain.
Exactly. I can make this inconvenient for you.
We love spite. I love it. A petty icon.
Exactly. So yeah, veiled chameleons have a little bit of a reputation for that, but I actually love it. I like that that attitude, and
we love a hater. We love it.
I mean, it kind of shows that they're not going to take it sitting down. They're going to stand up for themselves, and then when it's all said and done, they're going to move on. I kind of love that.
The only in-person experience I had with chameleons was during the time that I used to work at a pet store, and I got really lucky. And the pet store that I worked at, our manager actually had a degree in biology and really understood his animals really, really well. So during the time when we did have chameleons in the store, first of all, he never kept them on the sales floor, never had them just like out, like where everybody could just come by and, like, you know, kids poke the glass and stuff like that. So the chameleons were never kept on the sales floor. They were kept in a back room. If somebody wanted to see the chameleon, they could ask to go into the back room, and then they had to be accompanied by a staff member to go see the chameleon. So like, and he told us this was because they're really sensitive and very like prone to stress, and that can like really, this was a huge pain when it came time to, like, you know, we had to like mist their enclosure every day, like multiple times a day. Huge pain to have to go into the locked room all day long.
Yep. No, but it's a safe way to do it. I mean, chameleons are definitely very aware of what's going on around them. They do tend to be more prone to stress than a lot of other reptiles, which makes them a little bit sensitive. That stress in their environment and wearing their emotions a little bit on their sleeve, sometimes, if you will, to anthropomorphize them a little bit more, it can have effects on their immune system. And, you know, it can cause health issues that make them delicate and challenging in captivity.
And that makes a lot of sense with what you said about how good their eyesight is, right? Like, if they can see a hawk flying around, a couple 100 feet up in the air, like, they can totally see you right in front of them tapping on their glass.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I mean, they also sense all the vibrations. You know, they're in a tree, they're in branches. Those vibrations on the ground are being sent out onto those branches and amplified. So they're very aware of their environment.
And I think that these are such popular reptiles, right? To people want chameleons. Like you said, you know, you've got interest in chameleons because you wanted to have one. People like to have them around because these are just very interesting looking animals.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the final category that we rate animals on, which is aesthetics. It's just how this animal looks, like whether you think it's cool or cute, pretty. What do you give chameleons out of 10 for aesthetics?
I have to give them a 10.
They're so funky.
I'm biased, but how can you not? I mean, they're just so unique with the colors and the body shape and the behaviors, and, you know, just aesthetically, that's a cool animal. You know, a lot of people, of course, are weary of reptiles. They can be, you know, nervous about snakes or lizards or something like that. But very often, people that are nervous about snakes or nervous about lizards in general, a chameleon is different for them. It's just like, oh, okay, that, like, they may not, you know, be rushing out to hold it or anything like that, but it's something that usually they can appreciate. And I really think that speaks a lot towards the aesthetics of the animal. There's something special about them.
It's a soft sell, I think. Yeah. You can get people which I'm sure the chameleon prefers as well. Like, the chameleon probably is like, cool, I would prefer you not try to hold me, actually.
That's also a huge step for a lot of people. You know, that soft sell is a massive improvement over what they may think about snakes or, you know, something else, which, fair enough.
I know it's like picking a favorite child, but do you have a favorite chameleon?
I don't know that I could pick a single one. There's so many different species, and so many of them are unique for different ways that I could probably only pick a couple. But, you know, I'll mention a couple that I find fascinating. So there's a group of chameleons from Madagascar in a genus called Bruxia. And these are leaf chameleons. They are more or less terrestrial, or more terrestrial than most chameleons. They're somewhat cryptic, and so they tend to be browns and shades of drab colors. But they have incredible ornamentation that helps them mimic the leaves, the dried leaves and bark and so forth from twigs, including projections from their vertebrae that extend out of the skin that look like spines. There's a species that have osteoderms, which are bones within their skin as like bony plates, and they have these kind of like mountain-like projections that extend out in various directions. Hugely bizarre and very small. These are some of the smallest species of chameleons in the world as well. And so these leaf chameleons, I think, are just fascinating because they're so unique. I also think that species that I mentioned living on the desert sand dunes, the chameleon, I think that's a super cool species as well, just because it's so different from what you would expect a normal chameleon to look like. But then there are some really interesting species that have incredible color patterns, really bizarre anatomical features. So there's some species from Cameroon, from the mountains of Cameroon, that have sails, crests on the base of their tail and on their back. They have these horns that stick out from their nose, and just really impressive animals.
Playing the hits from the dinosaur sort of aesthetic, like everything you like about dinosaurs.
Exactly. Chameleons have a lot of those features. They may not have the size, they may not have all of them, but a lot of those weird features, there's some similarities with chameleons in many cases.
That makes me want to see art of dinosaurs with like chameleon color palettes.
Yeah.
I want to see that. I want to see the Triceratops with like the purple stripes.
There you go. Yeah, more color change capability. That'd be super cool.
Because how would we know?
Yeah.
It's up for it's open to interpretation. Have your fun with it.
Yeah, and our artist representations, that all they are is hypotheses. They're guesses.
I loved the documentary series that came out a few years ago, Prehistoric Planet, because there were some like dinosaur stuff that they were just like, we're having fun with it. Give them throat sacks. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can't tell me they didn't have throat sacks. We don't know that.
Exactly. No, I mean, like if you think about the skull of a hippopotamus or the skull of a dolphin or a whale, if we found that as a fossil, there's no way that our artist representations would actually look like what we see, in the living animal. And so you have to, wonder what some of these things might have actually looked like.
Give them fun colors.
Yeah, maybe they were more chameleon-like.
We would love to see it.
Yeah. Now I do have to, exactly. Now there's some fun techniques that paleontologists do, of course, to help give insights into like how they may have stood and how they may have moved around. But, we don't really know a lot about some of the soft tissue that makes a lot of the features that the animal actually appears to us. So yeah, who knows what they actually look like.
So have your fun with it. Let your imagination run wild. Take some inspiration. Be like Pokemon. Take some inspiration from the natural world. I mean, with chameleons, you've got a whole grab bag of delightful little things you can just sprinkle in there.
Absolutely. Bio-inspired design.
You can't go wrong with chameleons.
Nope, exactly.
So for anyone listening who is inspired and feels the love and the passion for chameleons and is maybe about to embark on their own origin story of going on this 6-month sort of chameleon info bender and then letting that become the life trajectory, where can people go after this? Like, where can people follow along with more of your work?
Yeah. So, one thing I think that's really important is education about the animals. If you're thinking about embarking on having a chameleon as a pet, you really do need to do some research about what their requirements are, what their needs are, and make sure that you're able to provide for those, because they are some fairly specific demands and requirements. But in addition to that, as you had kind of alluded to earlier, chameleons are heavily prized in the pet trade. And some of that is sustainable and ethical, and some of it is not sustainable and is of conservation concern. And so it's very important for people who are interested in those type of pursuits to become educated about the species that they're looking at and the origins of those species, and to make sure that they are, pursuing something that is ethical and sustainable. Chameleons are fascinating, and I think that from my own experience, I think working with them in the hobby was an excellent way for me to gain an appreciation for them and really push myself to learn more about the animals themselves and, study them as well. And so I think that type of involvement has an important place for future education, outreach, understanding, conservation, and so forth. And education is just really the key. And so the IUCN's Chameleon Specialist Group has a Facebook and a formerly Twitter page where IUCN Chameleons on those that you can go, and we post links to new research that comes out about chameleons just to scratch that itch of curiosity for people. cycle as we learn more about these animals and find new species. We are working on a website which we are hoping will be live by the actual International Chameleon Day on the 9th. And so that will be linked on our Facebook and our former Twitter pages. So check that out. It'll have information on different species and links to information on them. And otherwise, just educate yourself and seek out reliable information from trustworthy sources.
Yeah, I know that can be hard to come by and a little harder every day as the sort of landscape of information we have access to gets a little bit muddier every single day.
And I, as one of those kids who ended up researching it for an extended period of time, I think it's an effective way. I mean, I read a lot. I started to learn through that process what information was fairly consistent and reliable and what was maybe less reliable. And I think that education is really important for these animals in many different ways.
And also, like, as a parent, take your kids' interests seriously because you never know what could be that thing. Like, what's going to be that thing that's going to become their whole life.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think this is a good example of that for me.
I wonder if your parents were like, let's just put the brakes on this. Probably like, oh, he'll forget about it in 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe there was a little bit of that. They were always really supportive of my interest in having animals and so forth. So they probably had a little bit of a hunch that it might stick around. But, if nothing else, it made sure that it was something that wasn't a fleeting interest.
6 months later, you come back with like a stack of books and you're like, I'm back and worse.
That's exactly right. So, more dangerous.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. This has been an amazing time learning about chameleons from you, just in time for International Chameleon Day, which now everybody can celebrate. Having more knowledge and in-depth appreciation for chameleons. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. We will talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that the chameleon has curled its dexterous little tail right around your heart. If you liked what you heard today, I hope you leave behind some kind words for us in a review on your podcast app of choice. If you want to hang out with us online, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and TikTok. Links to everything will be in the episode description. You can also send me an email at ellen@justthezooofus.com if you have a cool animal you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. We would like to thank Maximum Fun for having us on their network alongside their other amazing shows like the ones that you heard promos for earlier in the episode. You can go check those out and learn more about the network and how you can be a part of supporting our show over at MaximumFun.org. Finally, we would like to thank Louis Zong for our theme music. That's all for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
MaximumFun.org.
Comedy and culture.
Artist owned, audience supported.